These refugees are not from Kosovo. They're Albanians fleeing from villages which are being shelled by the Serbs, who regard their communities as KLA strongholds. They are refugees in their own country. Albanian civilians have been killed and wounded. This man was badly injured near the border. The American helicopter, part of the NATO force here, took him away for emergency treatment. To add to the tension, the Albanian forces have also taken casualties. 2 border policemen who stepped on landmines on their side of the frontier had to be carried 5 miles to reach medical help. The Albanian government has always said that it will respond with force to any attack on its territory. This morning, the Albanian army was underlining that threat with a live fire exercise within a few miles of the Serb positions across the border. It's designed to send a very clear message.
People don't always have access to the news. A lot of them wanted to know, was this fighting, had it come over the border, what in fact was happening here?
Do you think the exercise and the real...
Yet, as NATO steps up the campaign to what it calls a crescendo. In Belgrade, a power distribution plant was hit, cutting off most electricity in the capital and plunging residents into darkness. Psychological warfare on Yugoslav civilians. But the result of the raids is that most of the country is now without electricity. And high explosive bombs, as well as graphite soft bombs, are now being used on the power system, inflicting permanent damage that will be much more difficult to repair.
In more than 1,000 aircraft, NATO's bombing campaign is at last nearing full throttle. One senior Air Force officer says the next 5 days will be critical in determining whether airstrikes can bring Serb President Milosevic to terms. As if to underscore that point, CBS News has learned Defense Secretary Cohen made a secret trip yesterday to Germany for a meeting of European defense ministers at which they agreed to expand the targets NATO can hit and to increase yet again the number of airplanes. Clear weather and more planes means Serb gunners will get a better shot at their targets. Today, an A-10 aborted its mission after nearly being hit by a missile. Between 5 and 10 planes have been hit since the war began, including 2 that were shot down. NATO planes are punishing Serb forces, but are doing nothing to help the hundreds of thousands of refugees still trapped inside Kosovo. Their campfires clearly visible to reconnaissance aircraft. Today, a private relief organization said it will try.
The International Rescue Committee expects to begin airdrops in Kosovo of food and other critically needed supplies next week.
NATO aircraft have promised not to interfere, but there is no guarantee from the Serbs.
I think it's not a good idea, frankly, as an airman. And the one reason I say that is because I have zero trust in what Milosevic or his army might try to do.
The latest fighting inside Kosovo shows how the KLA often finds itself surrounded by Serb troops. Here, 2 soldiers have a lucky escape when a sniper's bullet rebounds off the bank and into a stream. There are many who are not so lucky, but they seem committed to carrying on the fight despite their fears. The KLA say they are pushing the Serbs back and away from the border. They also have definite objectives in mind.
In 2 weeks, we are in Jakova. There is Jakova and any countries in the line.
Jakova is one of the main cities 10 kilometers beyond the border. According to the KLA, this is no longer a guerrilla war. They are openly confronting the Serb army in the field. Heavy weapons and mortars appear to be readily available. The KLA troops are a mixed bunch of people. Many have come to fight in this war from overseas. Their idealism is evident. Their ability to score real successes against an organized Serb army has yet to be proven. Ross Appleyard, Sky News, Albania.
Very General has said, it's very, very impressive to be here with the pilots and the air crews and all of the maintenance personnel. We've reviewed the procedures, the plans, the results. We've talked to a number of air crewmen, the mission planners, and the intelligence staffs, and the maintainers today, and just gotten a real sampling for how things are going at this very, very important base. We've got almost 200 aircraft here and from several different nations, and it is a real model of NATO cohesion and unity. The crews are working together extremely well. The morale is extremely high, and we're getting outstanding results on the ground and in the sky over Yugoslavia, and particularly over Kosovo. I'm very proud of the continuous innovation and adaptation, the learning being done by the air crews. On every mission, they're learning new techniques, they're perfecting their skills, and they're approaching this task with the highest degree of professionalism and concern to minimize collateral damages and to strike precisely the assigned targets or fielded forces.
General said that the pilots he spoke to told him about seeing villages burning as they fly over Kosovo, the result of what they believe is the deliberate destruction of property by the Yugoslav army and Serb police and paramilitaries involved. 1,000 German soldiers are stationed in Macedonia. They provide technical and logistical support for NATO's airstrikes in Yugoslavia. And if and when a peace agreement is signed, they'll form part of an international force which will see the accord is implemented in Kosovo. The German soldiers have also been providing humanitarian assistance in the Balkans. 4 o'clock in the morning at the NATO airbase at Geilenkirchen in Germany. An aircrew boards its E-3 AWACS. AWACS stands for Airborne Warning and Control System. The plane with the giant mushroom radar on its back is NATO's eyes in the skies. German airman Jürgen Wolfel will be part of the 17-man multinational crew on this mission, including Americans, Canadians, Italians, and other Germans. They'll be on a surveillance mission tonight lasting 12 hours. For 10 of those hours, they'll be circling the Adriatic. At any one time, the alliance has 3 E-3s in action, covering all aerial activity within a 1,000-kilometer radius. The console operators seated at the back of the cabin monitor information provided to them by the aircraft's many computer systems. They identify all aircraft in the area. Captain Wolfel has been flying AWACS missions since 1988. He served during the Gulf War and the mission in Bosnia.
We have to tell Allied aircraft from enemy aircraft. We direct Allied aircraft and warn of enemy activity. That's basically what our role is.
On the night of this mission, NATO aircraft are flying about 800 sorties. The airmen at the console see the planes as dots on a screen. But this is no computer game. NATO bombs kill people, and Serbian anti-aircraft missiles try to shoot down the alliance aircraft.
Well, you need to think about that, or get the chance to think. You can't do that sitting at the console, you're working. You register it, but you can't really understand it until later.
The aircraft needs refueling in mid-flight. It's a risky maneuver that never fails to put nerves on edge. The crew's been flying a mission every 2 days, and that's physically very demanding.
Oh, it's very stressful. You have to try and relax after every mission. You have to turn off, but it's not always possible.
After 10 hours patrolling the skies, the mission ends and the crew turns the aircraft back towards Germany. Jürgen Wolfel has 2 days rest ahead of him. He'll be able to follow the war on television at home. Meanwhile, the next E-3s are taking off for the Adriatic.
He never wanted to become defense minister. But now, talking to soldiers is just part of his daily routine. And as long as he's in the post, he says, he wants to do as good a job as possible.
Augen gerade, aus! Zur Meldung, Augen, rechts!
1,600 Bundeswehr soldiers are stationed here in Tetovo in the northwest of Macedonia. For the senior commander, their task is clear. They have to hold out until Milosevic surrenders.
It's an unpleasant fact that when a window is broken at the ambassador's residence in Belgrade, there are pictures of that. But as for children hounded from their homes, women who have been raped, men who have been murdered, at best all we have are pictures taken from the air, indicating mass graves.
If the suffering is to be brought to an end, then every soldier has to pitch in. That means 16-hour days every day.
So, komm, lass mich aber. Ich will doch nur den Leuten schnell guten Tag sagen. Namen allerseits.
As well as saying hello, the defense minister wanted to thank the troops on behalf of the German people. He swapped jokes with them well into the night. The soldiers described his visit as a boost to morale. which was starting to flag after being away from home for so long. Having met the troops, the minister flew on to Cegrane to visit a refugee camp for 40,000 people, built by German soldiers. The refugees in Cegrane gave Sharping an enthusiastic welcome. Afterwards, Sharping described their reaction as euphoric and said they were delighted that NATO was fighting their enemy. And despite the suffering, there was relief as well.
On the one hand, there's great euphoria, which is understandable. Their lives have been saved. But on the other, they're having to cope with unusually difficult conditions, regardless of whether it's winter or summer.
The defense minister admitted he was hopeful that the war would end soon, but he couldn't be certain that it would. And he said he didn't even want to think about using ground troops.
NATO headquarters in Albania is nestled in the sands on the Adriatic coast. The sandbagged area also protects the working and living quarters of the ever-growing contingent from Germany. And even though the camp has not yet been fully built up, the 127-man specialist company is ready to start work. The company will be responsible for creating NATO's internal communications network. This is needed because the Albanian phone system is hopelessly overloaded.
Albania only has a small number of phone lines. It would take months, maybe even years, to bring the network up to speed. Some villages have to rely on just one line. That's not enough for operational purposes.
As its name would suggest, this immediate reaction force unit has moved pretty quickly. The company landed only a couple of days ago, brought to Albania in an Airbus belonging to the German Air Force. Nobody seems to know for sure just how long the new arrivals to the Balkan conflict will be staying.
We were told 4 to 6 weeks, no other details.
A ship laden with the company's equipment lies docked in the Albanian port of Durrës 10 days after leaving Cuxhaven in northern Germany. About 300 trucks and trailers poured out of the hold, bringing millions of dollars worth of telecommunications equipment to NATO headquarters 10 kilometers away. Some of the equipment will go to the German camp in the southern Albanian town of Berat. The Bundeswehr will set up a secure network to ensure communications among NATO forces. A well-trained unit can turn this off-the-road vehicle into a temporary switching station inside a quarter of an hour. Constant practice is the order of the day. Soon this kind of station will become a junction in the Bundeswehr communications network that will link NATO headquarters with units throughout Albania.
24 of these are along the border that monitor the coming and going and actually direct artillery. This is another one. We've taken about 2/3 of these down. This has been totally destroyed. There's some question that came out in the press, I think, and I'm not sure whether it was Serbia reported it or it was just open press, but that they have a Vinca nuclear research station installation that has actually been non-operational since before this operation started, and there was a claim that we had some collateral damage on that over the last couple days. This picture was taken last night. The expert photo interpreters have looked at it as close as they can, and we see no indication whatsoever of any damage that would have been caused by any bombing. The closest we've gotten to there is over several kilometers away in any attack, so we cannot find any damage whatsoever that we can tell from this picture. Of course, we're not on the ground, but we doubt very seriously if there's any damage whatsoever to that facility.
Where's that located, General?
It's in southeast of Belgrade.
About how far, do you know?
I don't know, and I'll check for you.
What sort of research is done there?
They were doing nuclear research for nuclear power, and it's been non-functional for, like I said, since before this started, and I think for probably over a year. But as you can see, they took a close look. We've looked as hard as we can. We can't see any damage to it at all. There may be damage inside, but
Any weapons production capability?
none that you could probably tell why. There's a lot of buildings in it. It's one of the major military garrison for vehicle storage, etc. I showed some film of that before. I'll show some today. We hit it in 4 places. Yesterday, there was 4 places aimed at. One of the bombs landed along in the field. There was some claim of some collateral there yesterday. We can find no indication whatsoever where any of our bombs landed where there could have been collateral. Now, there was collateral on 5 April here, so we're not sure what the report's are. In Novi Sad, it's an underground bunker. very hardened. It's difficult to see here, but you'll see it's a direct hit on the bunker. He's trying to aim for a little spot over here, right in here, moves it in, and has a pretty good shot at hitting that either entry point or vent. Looks like it hits it well, so that's a very difficult target, and it's continued to take down his backup command centers and command and control. Freedom of movement from lines of communication. We haven't talked a lot about that over the last few days, but we've continued to hit bridges. This is Medvegovic highway bridge in southeast Serbia. It's a fairly large highway bridge. And this is a direct hit and causes structural damage to the bridge to the point it's not usable.
The RAF call it upping the ante, raising the stakes against President Milosevic. The first of a wave of 12 Tornado bombers flew into Corsica from Germany late this afternoon. The French airbase of Solonzara is much closer to the combat zone. That means these Tornadoes from number 9 Squadron in Bruggen can increase their mission efficiency and decrease the amount of time they spend in the air-to-air refueling to reach the skies above Kosovo. Being based here in Corsica means the RAF pilots will be able to cut their mission time by more than half, and that gives much more combat flexibility to the military planners.
Well, of course, we couldn't possibly be sharper, but this will reduce the sortie length significantly. And of course, we have navigators as well, who will also appreciate the shorter sortie length. But yes, it's going to make our much more efficient, and if we wish, we can fly more sorties than we could have done from home base.
For one pilot in the squadron, this will be the first time in combat.
Apprehensive. However, at the end of the day, it's a job that I've been trained for the last 8 years, so I shall just do my best and take it from there.
A squadron of sappers have been racing against a tough deadline to prepare the base for the RAF. Everything has to be up and running and ready for combat in the next 48 hours. David Chater, Sky News, Corsica.
NATO is about to get more firepower, courtesy of the United States. The 68 additional warplanes include 12 F-16 Fighting Falcons, 36 F-15 Strike Eagles, and 20 KC-135 tanker aircraft, used primarily for air-to-air refueling. Pentagon officials say the added firepower signals a further intensification of the air war against Yugoslavia.
It just keeps putting the pressure on Milosevic from different spots around he's really got a ring starting to develop around him from all angles.
Even before the infusion of additional aircraft, improving weather over the past several days has allowed NATO to step up attacks, focusing most of its firepower directly on the Yugoslav Third Army in Kosovo. On day 66 of the air war, NATO planes also pounded airfields, ammunition storage sites, and communications targets throughout Serbia.
And NATO peacekeepers in Kosovo. Instead, Belgrade wants Russian troops together with some Serb forces. NATO says there'll be no let-up in the bombing. The Kosovo capital, Pristina, was among the latest targets. But with its allies wary of using ground troops, NATO has no other means of forcing Belgrade to yield.
In readiness to join the 12,500 already in the Balkans. Several hundred doctors and nurses from the National Health Service may go with them. Their recruitment backed by the British Medical Association. But NATO is denying widespread reports that Britain is pledging up to a third of a ground invasion force of 150,000 planned for Kosovo. It's claimed they were promised at a secret meeting of European defence ministers last week.
There was no decision.
The air campaign is persuading President Milosevic to broad acceptance of the peace plan by the major Western powers.
But planes with orders to intensify their attacks across Yugoslavia. Military officials say these aircraft are striking day and night, but the forces NATO says are keeping President Milosevic in power.
We have a bridge in central Serbia. It says at least 11 people are dead and adds that dozens more were injured when 3 missiles struck the bridge over the Velika Morava River. NATO says it's taking advantage of clear weather to launch daylight.
Out and destroying individual artillery placements with guided bombs. Driving planes are on their way from the United States for operations over Yugoslavia. British Tornado fighter bombers are also being redeployed from their bases in Germany to the French island of Corsica. NATO says the shorter flying distance to Serbia will increase the military pressure on the Yugoslav leadership.
Known for NATO to strike Belgrade during daylight, but it has been pretty rare.
Now that President Milosevic seems to be inching towards an acceptance of NATO's demands, the bombing is intensifying. But it seems there's still some way to go before all the demands can be fully met.
Troops are intended to bolster the force of around 14,000 NATO troops, which will serve as peacekeepers in Kosovo, if and when Yugoslavia gives in to NATO demands. Despite such strong opposition, officials want more Western aid and a commitment that the troops will not be used in offensive action against Yugoslavia. And with more than 200...
For hours, the explosions were more frequent, the sounds as frightening as ever. Belgrade was being hit hard with loss of life.
Intensifying NATO air campaign is key to the alliance strategy to force President Milosevic to give considerable ground on his stance over Kosovo in what's likely to be a crucial week of diplomatic activity. The demands of the G8 countries, which include Russia, are an immediate end of a UN Security Council resolution, and the demands overlap strongly with NATO's. But while the UN resolution would seek a multinational peacekeeping force, NATO insists its forces must form the command and control core of any force going into Kosovo, along with Russian military participation. There are now strong indications that Milosevic has shifted.
Many people are in the dark, both physically because of the electricity blackouts and mentally because they have no idea when it will end. Tim Marshall, Sky News, Belgrade.
The Serbs are taking a pounding from NATO in the air and the Kosovo Liberation Army on the ground. Whether or not they're acting in concert, the alliance acknowledges its airstrikes are helping the KLA. But the Serbs are retaliating, hitting targets inside Albania, including Russia, to stop the war. And that means withdrawing Yugoslav forces from Kosovo and accepting an international peace force.
It started early and it's been going on all day. This is the main crossing point on the border between Kosovo and Albania, but now the fighting threatens to spread across the frontier into Albania itself. The fighting is between the Serbs and the Kosovo Liberation Army. Both sides are determined to contest every meter of land. The KLA is trying to open up a supply corridor, vital if its latest offensive is to be a success. They're lightly armed, but have NATO effectively flying air support missions. The roar is from anti-aircraft fire. The flares are designed to throw the surface-to-air missiles off target. The skies over Kosovo are still far from safe for Allied pilots, but they're pounding artillery and tank positions again and again. This fighting is going on every day, and it seems to be intensifying all the time. It all makes this border area a highly dangerous place to be, but still the refugees continue to cross into Albania.
And welcome to the Royal Air Force detachment at Solenzara in Corsica. In a moment I'll hand you over to Lieutenant Colonel Forrest, who's the Deputy Base Commander here. But first I'd like to describe the detachment and how we've established ourselves. Now our 12 aircraft, 12 Tornado GR1s, are now fully operational and ready to provide support to our Allied force as required and tasked by NATO. Many people may wonder why we've moved to Solenzara, and there are some distinct advantages. First of all, it allows us to give greater flexibility in the use of our aircraft, because clearly the distance between the previous base of Bruggen and the operational area, compared with the distance from Solenzara, is significantly different. We are, of course, much, much closer. And this gives us the potential, if required, to raise the tempo and make much more efficient use of our offensive capability. As importantly, it also frees
borders of Montenegro, on a mountain road above the Montenegrin capital of Podgorica, close to a vital Montenegrin television transmitter. Yugoslav troops and Montenegrin police were involved in a confrontation watched by indignant civilians. It was symptomatic of the rising tension between Yugoslavia and the government of the sister republic it regards as disloyal and sympathetic to the NATO allies.
It was the evening of March the 24th, shortly before 8, when NATO jets took off for their first missions against military targets in Yugoslavia. Since then, there have been over 25,000 sorties. NATO says over 14,000 were bombing raids, aimed at degrading infrastructure and cutting supply routes. Most of Yugoslavia's main bridges have been destroyed. By late May, the number of aircraft in the air, night and day, had risen to 1,000, 3 times more than at the beginning of the NATO operation. Most of the aircraft take off from bases in Italy. Others come from further afield, such as Germany. In May, NATO began launching missions from